This is an applique patch. It's a lo-fi way to add graphic elements to your garments and reduce your scrap pile. Applique is a decorative patching method and appears in many guises across many cultures. As such, it has been refined over the years into fine art. Feel free to search needle turn applique if you want that, but I want to introduce something a bit more rough and ready. It starts with a drawing. I'm quite happy freehanding this drippy eyeball. It's the sort of thing I doodle regularly when I'm supposed to be paying attention in meetings. If this isn't in your skill set, steal something you like off the internet and print it off. Just make sure it's graphically simple with defined edges. I'll also point out that I was purposeful when I picked the size of my sheet of paper. Eventually this patch will go on the back of a shirt I'm making, and this sheet is narrower than the width of the back panel of my garment. So I can't draw anything that won't fit. I gather up some scrap jersey knit in various colours and weights, aiming to blend these greens, browns and oranges and contrast them with the blues. I can then cut out the first pattern piece from my drawing. I choose the wing as it's the middle layer of the composition. Craft scissors would work, but I prefer a knife and a cutting board. I lay out the chosen fabric and the pattern and trace the outline onto the fabric. I'm going to extend where the wing attaches to the rest of the work, so I have some seam allowance, and cut it out with my fabric scissors. That's one down. Looking at my drawing again, it is the eyeball that goes on top of the wing. I'm planning to build up the layers of pupil, iris and whites to give this part of the design some depth. So I start with the top layer, cutting out the pupil. I repeat the process, tracing the edge and cutting out. Now I start to freehand. Most of the tutorials you'll find for this are very rigorous on the right method or use this process here for perfect results. And that's fine, but really this is a very simple home craft that can be playful and intuitive. I lay out the pupil and mark out an iris that I like the look of. Be generous with your sizing as you can always trim it down later. I do cut out the pattern for the whites because I want it to fit the proportions of the wing. I add some seam allowance to the top edge, but I don't cut out the middle. I lay these out to see if it's working before moving on to the eyelid bubble thing. Same process again, but this time I'm not happy with the bulk blue and decide to mix it up. I cut the pattern into two and make some additional bubbles in the orange. This gives me something I can play around with and arrange as I please later. Now for the big drip. I use the whites as a guide and freehand the shape. This time I mark in a U-shaped seam allowance to reduce some of the bulk of the patch. I cut it out and all the elements are there together. I start freehand cutting some more drips, and to be honest I'm not sold on these, but we'll move on to the background swooshes. So here's the thing. I've been slapdashing most of this and that's fine for me, but maybe you are being a bit more rigorous with your patterning. Well, this swoosh shape is a problem as it cuts through several important details. You can't cut out one without destroying the other. If you want to pattern everything, you'll need copies, which is a hassle. Tracing by hand through cartridge paper sucks. Tracing paper is a fairly indulgent material, but as a dedicated sewist, you may have some for pattern drafting. Light boxes are expensive one way or the other. I haven't tried tracing against a window since primary school, but that's an option. You could, of course, digitize your asset, print as many identical copies as you want, but on a bigger project you'll be sticking paper together, and that's 100% the reason I'm learning to pattern draft. So yeah, I guess pick your poison and plan for it. Anyway, I cut out the swoosh. And this is the cutout design. I buried the lead a bit. I should point out that knit fabrics aren't really recommended for raw edge applique, as they aren't very stable and like to fray. You really want a felt or a wool weave. I've left this in to make a quick point. When I was researching this video, someone somewhere said jersey was a bad idea. I wrote the script, I made the thing, and it worked great. The point is, don't just trust some rando off the internet. try things out for yourself. Also, most experienced people would recommend adding fusible interfacing to hold your panels in place and secure your edges before stitching your panels down, either by hand or with a machine. And yeah, that sounds like a good idea. You should do that. I'm using embroidery thread and a blanket stitch because I think it looks cool. The blanket stitch should protect the raw edge a little, and a bit of fraying should add texture to the edges in a way that pleases me. And honestly, that's the joy of this. Make it yours. Use the techniques you enjoy and refine your process as you progress. As I build up the layers, I use a mixture of blanket stitch, a machine zigzag, and learned how to chain stitch to add some details. Until I have the patch. To finish, I iron out the patch, turn it to the wrong side, place some fusible lining on the back and iron it in place. Rip it from what's left of my ironing board cover and cut off the excess. When I come to attach this to a garment, I'll base the patch in place with thread before going around all the edges with a blanket stitch. Eventually there will be a link to a film showing that here. For now, please use your imagination. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope that was an enjoyable way to pass the time. If you're not ready to jump into some seat of your pants applique, why not watch some of my other videos? And subscribe. You should totally subscribe. Go on. Go on. You know, click that button. Go on.